You're listening to Beyond the Benchtop, a show about food ingredients. Our conversations go far beyond the lab as we dive into topics spanning from food science to market trends and everything in between.
Hello and welcome back to the St. Charles podcast, Beyond the Benchtop. My name is Kristi, and I'm sure you've known me from previous episodes, so I'm going to actually let my coworker, Mike Caruso, introduce himself.
Hi, Kristi. How you doing? My name is Mike Caruso. I'm a sales rep with St. Charles Trading. I've been here almost 4 years.
So thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. I know that there's been a lot of difficulties within the salt industry right now, but how do you think that St. Charles has really been able to alleviate those problems?
Well, we have really good relationships with our suppliers. Main supplier is Morton Salt, and we're one of the biggest distributors of Morton Salt there is. And those relationships with the suppliers get you through tough times like this.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that's really important. I'm liking that you're driving that point home of good relations.
Yeah, and salt is an interesting animal, so to speak, in that it's so cheap to produce. So a lot of manufacturers throughout the years, they have not upgraded equipment and all that to keep up with the demand. And certain years they'll shut down certain plants, and certain types of salt will become tighter for periods of time while they're redoing their facilities.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's hard for them to be able to make the adjustments that they need to just based upon demand. I mean, honestly, it's an ingredient that's used all year round. It's used in pretty much everything. So I'm sure that's really a struggle as well and can really affect the market.
You can't really plan for it. Couple years ago, one type of salt would be tighter than another one. You'd hear pretzel salt was tight. You'd hear dendritic salt was tight the next year. There's no real making headspace on how it's going to work out, but for some reason, every other year, a certain type of salt gets tight.
In what industry would you say that you really thrive in within your customer base?
Meat. I sell a good amount of salt to people that produce meat. Sausage and all kinds of meat.
Definitely. And for those that might not know, in meat curing, salt is like really probably the greatest product you can use for decreasing the microbial growth. It really helps with the water retention and lowering that water activity. So it's making it more shelf stable, as well as going to strengthen the time that you can use it, which is really great, because I think one thing that is the hardest thing in today's age is, you don't have a lot of go time with a product. It's getting shorter and shorter, and I think that's one thing that's really able to emphasize the profit, is being able to have a longer shelf life.
Absolutely. Yeah, and going back to meat, if the words of one of my suppliers or my customers is that my biggest asset is the meat, and my cheapest thing that I have to buy to preserve that is salt.
Exactly.
So the salt has to be there when the meat needs it.
I know, and I think it's interesting too. A lot of people just associate salt with just flavor, but it's actually both, lowering the microbial activity as well as adding flavor as well, which is something that's interesting. And sometimes in meat curing or rubs, they'll use sugar as well, but actually the most successful one for lowering the water activity is salt. So I think it's really a powerful ingredient because it's always going to stay relevant and the market will always stay stable.
Yes. It's been around for a very long time. There's several, it's alluded to several times throughout the Bible, and here it is today, still as relevant as it was back then.
Yeah. Do you want to share your fun salt facts?
So
so excited.
I got a few. There's an island out in the British Virgin Islands. It's called Salt Island, and in the late 1800s, there was a British ship crashed into it, and it was a big tragedy. And it's still there today, and the population has never gone more than 3 people on this island, and they pay the Queen of England, their rent money is 1 5-pound sample of the salt from Salt Island a year.
Oh my God!
It still happens to this day.
Are you hoping to someday be one of the three?
Maybe. I don't know. It doesn't
He's
look
like, if I'm lucky.
You could see it from the island of Tortola, so I'd rather hang out in Tortola.
And then
just
maybe
look
you could
at
just
it. Yeah.
swim over.
Right.
Wow, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's one I've never heard of, so I'm glad you brought that
Yeah,
up.
to this day, it still happens. A 5-pound sample gets sent to the queen.
I'm leaving it to you to check up every year and making sure it goes through.
Yeah. So and obviously like I said in the Bible, it's mentioned a ton of times, and it was obviously like other spices, it was used as currency as well as
trading.
in offerings, and all that stuff. So it's a prior to being in this business, I never noticed how relevant salt was in the history of the world. But once you're in this business, you notice food and ingredients a heck of a lot more than you did beforehand.
Yeah, that's true. It has a lot of staying power, I would say, for sure. The next question I have is, what do you think is the most difficult issue relating to the salt industry?
So the most difficult issue that I see is the supply chain aspect of it, where, like I was saying, facilities produce X amount. They have, they try to map it out. There's machines go down. Certain diet things change where a certain kind of salt becomes more popular.
Trendy.
You mentioned like Himalayan sea salt is a big one. Lately that's picked up a lot of steam, and if something goes wrong in the supply chain side, a lot of these customers, if you have chip customers, you have snack customers, it's a big ingredient for them, even though it's very cheap. It's a big part of their ingredient deck. And the supply chain thing is the hiccups that happen on occasion.
Definitely. I think the availability is probably, like you said, the hardest.
We'll do things for certain customers where we'll pre-plan for that. And get X amount on the floor just in case there's an emergency.
Yeah, that's definitely good. I remember a friend told me that what can go wrong will go wrong. So I think that's really a good point. I'm saying that's really valid. Have you seen, talking about snacks, a shift to the snack industry for salt because of COVID?
I haven't seen any change in the snack customers that I have due to COVID at all. No. I mean, I think there's been more, people are eating at home more. I haven't seen a drastic change.
Really? That's interesting, because I feel like in most industries it has, but also salt is just something that's in everything. So I'm sure it's just steady overall. The next question I have is, do you think that the salt market will start to become more competitive, or do you think it will just relatively stay the same?
It is competitive now, but there's only a few players in it, so they kind of play off each other on pricing and availability. And certain manufacturers, they'll have a certain type of salt that's their wheelhouse. Other manufacturers will kind of stay away from that and let their competitors
have their
specialize
own.
in that, and then they'll shift towards this. So I mean, it's competitive because unfortunately there's not a lot of players in the game.
Yeah. I think it's maybe competitive and trying to make themselves stick out from others, I would say.
Correct.
Yeah. What is the most challenging time within your industry for the salt?
So depending on the type of salt, so there's certain facilities that are located, upper northeast, and in the wintertime, getting trucks in and out of certain areas based on the weather is a challenge. After the winter, in the other seasons, there's not really a challenge unless there's a specific issue with a facility. And then, because it's salt and they produce X amount, they have to schedule cleanings of their equipment. And, unfortunately, sometimes these cleanings are scheduled where it doesn't fit in well with my customers' needs. So this is stuff where when you have communication with the customers and whatnot, you plan ahead of time for that. So other than that, I don't see any other challenges at any different times of the year except for
definitely.
winter.
And it's pretty consistent, you would say, year to year.
Yes.
Where would you personally like to see a shift within the salt market? In what industry?
So it's interesting, big thing now because of social media is, one of my hobbies is smoking meat and
Yeah.
cooking and all that. And the rub industry is a big,
Yeah.
They buy a lot of salt. And unfortunately, when you buy the pre-made stuff, it's very salty. So
Yeah.
So we've gone to what I go to is making my own blends and using a lot less salt. I mean, everybody's got their different preference of how much salt they like in things.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just don't think much is going to change. There's always going to be salt, and there's going to be a lot of salt on a lot of stuff. It's it's the hidden sin for a lot of us, with whether it be chips or snacks and stuff like that. So I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's going to increase or decrease. You see all these different new healthy diets that say less salt, less salt, less salt, but I don't see less salt getting consumed.
Yeah, so. I agree with that point. I think the one industry I'll start to see rise is, like I was talking about, those flavored salts and the salt blends.
Yeah.
I think people are getting a little bit lazy with cooking, and they want just, a blend that might be jalapeno salt or a rosemary salt blend, and just be able to have that added to chicken, fish, popcorn topper, anything like that. It's just, I would say, more easily accessible as well as more convenient. So I think there'll be a little bit of a shift in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Market.
Absolutely. Like the Himalayan sea salt is a big thing, and then you'll go to some specialty cooking stores, like a Williams Sonoma or something like that, and they'll have kits of all like 15 different flavors of salt and stuff, where they'll smoke salt. People are smoking salt, different flavors and all that.
So, Mike, tell me, have you seen an increase in use of salt for baking as well as bread making?
Yeah, it depends, on the type of bread. I have a couple bakeries that would be consumers of the salt that I sell. Again, bread as a whole in COVID it was a lot of supply chain issues with bread.
Yeah.
And so the specialty breads kind of went to the back burner.
Yeah.
On a lot of the bread companies, they were more,
focused on the essentials,
on the main essential ones. Brings up another fun fact I have about salt and bread specifically is so I just read a book about Dante, the famous Italian poet, and he was around in the 1300s, and his famous Divine Comedy that he wrote, where he talks about going through hell, purgatory, and heaven. He meets a character who tells him, and Dante ended up being basically a political exile from the Roman Catholic Church at the time, and he gets told that he cannot have bread with salt in it. He has to always be searching around for it the rest of his life. And to this day, 700 plus years later, his hometown in Tuscany still, they make bread without salt in it, paying homage to Dante's existence in the 1300s.
Which to me is, I always thought that it was really essential for bread making because of like what I was talking about with the how it can really help with decreasing the moisture. And one thing that always makes bread go bad, you get that blue mold on it because of the increase in moisture. And that's typically why people use zip ties and things like that. Even though we might not be the best at using them, it does help preserve the product. So to me, it's pretty amazing. But also I think in different cultures, they consume bread at a much faster pace. I would say that, they buy a fresh loaf from day to day, whereas, Americans might be getting one and making that last for 2 weeks.
Especially the Italian culture.
Yeah. And there's less preservatives, I would say, in their bread as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I learned a lot. I hope that that you learned some from me as well.
I did. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening. Follow or subscribe so you can always catch the latest episode. For more information, check out our website at stcharlestrading.com. Keep up with the latest updates on social media through Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at St. Charles Trading. That's at St. Charles Trading.